I'm sure I don't say this enough, but one of my favorite things here is our worship team, and they don't do this for people's applause, but let's give them a hand. I really, really appreciate our worship team. If you don't know much about this music stuff like me, you come to find out there's a million little things that can go wrong at any point. And so they do a great job. I love our worship team. So we've been going through this series about growing to be like Jesus, and we looked at what it means to grow to love like Jesus and to be intentional like Jesus and to forgive like Jesus. And today we're going to talk about what it means to serve like him. Now, I get it. That does not sound appealing, all right? I get it. Well, that doesn't sound like my favorite thing to do is necessarily to serve. I know that many of us, if we really admitted it, would prefer to be served by somebody else. My wife loves watching those Victorian-era movies and TV shows set in England. And she says all the time, she goes, I was born in the wrong time. I need a, what are they called? Those are called the... ladies' maids. That's what it is. She goes, I need a ladies' maid. I'm like, what does that do? They go, well, they dress you. I go, literally, you want somebody to dress you. Like, you stand there, just so you know, that's actually why women's buttons are on the opposite side of where men's are, is because they had somebody dress them. That's why the buttons are on the other side. She's like, yes, I was born in the wrong era. I would love to have a ladies' maid to get their meals, whatever it might be. Now, here's the reality. I don't think any of us would mind having somebody wait on all our needs like that and to serve us. I'm sure we would like that. And it's a pretty nice life if you manage to be born into royalty, I'm sure. I'm sure that's pretty nice. But unfortunately, that's not how it works for us. And it really doesn't work for us at all if we're a Christian, regardless of where and when you were born. You see, we were not created to be served. We were created to serve. We are created by God to give of ourselves until we get the opportunity to meet him in person. That's why we were created to serve. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. You see, this idea of service isn't something that we're the only ones who wrestle with. Even the apostles wrestled with this idea and they struggled. A couple of them said, hey God, hey Jesus, we want to sit at these seats of importance. We want to be on your left and your right hand. You see, we all want to be served. This is what happened. Mark 10:37. This is James and John coming to Jesus. It says, they replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in glory. What this implies is those are the top seats. Those are the top dogs because they would be the closest to Jesus. You see, they wanted to be served. Jesus basically says, you guys have no idea what you're asking for. You don't understand what that means. That means suffering. It isn't a glorious position. And then Jesus says, it's not even up to me to give those seats. God will decide. But as you can imagine, the other apostles heard these guys say this, and it didn't sit too well. My boys, if they think one boy is getting something that the other didn't get, they are angry. You know, it doesn't even matter what it is, whether it's food or a snack or get to go somewhere. That's not fair. And the apostles do the exact same thing. Mark 10 says this. When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Basically, it means they said, that's not fair. It's not fair. Jesus called them together to settle down this little quarrel, basically. He says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. And not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be the first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. You see, Jesus had to make sure that they understood this huge concept of serving. Basically, Jesus says this. You want to be at my right hand? Serve. You want to be great? Serve. You want to lead? Serve. The best part about what Jesus says is this. It takes no natural talent. It takes no great knowledge. It takes, no special skills. We can all do that. We can all serve. So you want to be great? Serve. I don't know about you, but I want to be great. Like, I love that idea of being great. And there are some people, you know who they are, that prefer to be mediocre, right? Like, mediocre is the best they achieve for in life. They barely drift by, and you're like, why do you want to be mediocre when you could be great? I always encourage my boys to be different. You know, obviously, I want them to do things outside and more than what other people do, obviously within the confines of Christianity. But I always tell them, dude, if you do that, that will make you legend. You want to be legend. That's what I encourage them to do. I say, do something great. One of my boys, Jonah, he gets to do announcements for school, and he's not scared of getting up in front of people. And one day, he had a script of what he was supposed to say to introduce this person that was coming to speak at their school. Well, I looked at it, and I go, that's nice, but we need to add it to make you legend. And so he's like, well, no, I'm supposed to read this. And my wife is like, no, he needs to read what's on the paper. I go, well, we can add to the paper. And so I encourage my son. I read it. It's fine. And I go, here's what you need to do when you get done. I go, after you get done reading this, you need to tell the whole crowd, hey, let's give it up for, and name the guest speaker and get everybody all cheering and all that. And he's like, I don't know. He goes, it's not on there. I go, just trust me. You need to do this. So he does that. Everybody is cheering for this guy. He's like, let's give it up for him. Everybody's cheering. My son sees this couple in town somewhere, and the lady comes up to him and goes, weren't you the boy that introduced us? Did you see him one time at the school? And he's like, yeah. And I go, it's because you became legend. You did something different. I don't know about you, but I want to become legend. And Jesus says, you want to be legend? You want to become bigger than life? You want to do all these things? It's not being in front of everybody. It's not being that. It's serving. You want to be legend? You serve. That's what Jesus is telling his apostles, and that's what Jesus came to do, and he's telling us that same thing today. You want to be legend? You serve. Now, let me get this out of the way up front, though. I know you guys have heard how this sermon has started, and you may be thinking to yourself, oh no, not another sermon to get us involved in children's ministry. I get it. Now, the reality is, yes, of course, that is our most important ministry, and we'd love for you to do that. We'd love for you to be part of that. But here's the thing. It's not just about that. Serving is what Jesus has called us to do. He specifically told us to serve. He specifically told us, you want to be great, you serve. That is a command from him. I mean, we know the greatest commandment. You've heard it. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, you know how you see how you love? You serve. You serve. You care about people. You do things for them. And so as we look at this idea of service today, I want us all to think about how are we being great in God's kingdom. I want you to think about how can you be legend? How can you be legend in God's kingdom? Because it starts with service. In the first place, it starts with this, is commitment. The foundation for service is commitment. We serve when we believe in something. I've told you many times, I coach soccer. I've coached soccer for a long time, basketball. I love those sports. I do not coach baseball. I am not a baseball. Regardless of the people around here trying to change my mind, I am not a baseball guy. I believe soccer is best for little kids, and so I coach it because I believe in that. You see, we serve when we believe in something. So my question is this: do you believe in the church's mission? Now, not just our church locally, but the church's mission worldwide to reach people for Jesus, to grab as many people and take them to heaven with us before they die. Do you believe in that mission? I really hope that you do. I assume you do. But then do you believe in our church's mission? Because every church has a different specific mission. Our church's mission is this. Our mission is to reach 10% of Laclede County. That's what we are driving at doing. And so if you believe in our church's mission, then you would want to be a part of it. You would want to serve in some capacity to make that happen. You see, you see, to want to serve, we have to decide if we are committed. And we have to be willing to sacrifice to actually make a difference. That's what service is. I love this story by Kierkegaard. The Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote this. He wrote about a town where a fireman lived. And everyone liked this fireman because he was a nice guy, and he made it a habit to be gentle and kind, which for back then was unusual because these firemen were strong, tough, rugged guys. And there was a fire one day, and the fireman charged to the scene of the fire with his fellow firemen and heavy equipment. And as they came toward the fire, much to their surprise and the chagrin, the firemen encountered between themselves and the flame about 200 townspeople. Each of them was standing there with a little water pistol, aiming it at the fire, going squirt, squirt, squirt. The firemen asked, "What's going on here?" A spokesman for the group turned and said, "Well, we all appreciate this wonderful work you're doing in our community, and each of us has come to contribute in some small way to your work." Squirt, squirt. The fireman said, "I don't get it. You're all crazy." "Oh, we realized that we could do more, couldn't we, folks?" said the spokesman. "Oh, most definitely," everyone said. "But we just wanted to offer this token of our support." Squirt, squirt. "You don't know what you're doing," shouted the fireman. "True, we don't, but you have to appreciate the fact that everyone is willing to offer whatever help they can," said the spokesman. And everyone said amen and went squirt, squirt. At that, the fireman shouted, "Get out of here. This is no picnic. This is a fire, and a fire doesn't require well-meaning people who come to make small contributions. A fire is a place where people come to give their lives." I don't know about you, but all too often I forget that I'm fighting a fire. I forget that I'm fighting a fire. I forget that I'm fighting for people's lives today and how they live without hope and direction. I forget that I'm fighting for families that are struggling for God to be at the center of them. I forget that I'm fighting so that people don't have to actually be in fire for eternity. Too often I forget that I'm fighting a real battle that's going on, a real fire. Too often I want to do just enough to feel like I'm doing what God wants me to do. I just want to do enough. I want to go, squirt, squirt, look, I did my part. I did my part. I just want to feel okay about what I do. Too often, I don't want to actually sacrifice to serve. Maybe you're like me sometimes. You see, I have to be ready to give my life in service. My commitment to God has to be bigger than my commitment to myself. And that's really hard. There's things I like to do. There's things I want to do. Sometimes at my age and with all my kids, sometimes what I want to do is literally nothing. You see, it's about myself. I struggle with that idea, and maybe you do too. And Jesus actually talked about this specific idea in Luke 9. Luke 9 says this. Then he said to them all, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self?" I mean, this very idea of commitment is seen through what Jesus says here. This is extreme commitment. I mean, think about what he is saying here. He says, "Take up your cross daily and follow me." Well, what does that mean? Well, first, Jesus gave us this precedent and showed us what it really looks like to serve. He was predicting how he would give the ultimate act of service to the world. But here's the other thing. If you pick up your cross, it's a one-way trip. If you are carrying your cross, you are not coming back. You are going to die, and it is what is going to happen. It is not a fun trip. It is a serious commitment. There was a chicken and a pig, and they were walking down the street one day, and they noticed some poor children looked as if they hadn't eaten for days. Moved with compassion, the chicken said to the pig, "I've got an idea. Let's give these children a nice breakfast of ham and eggs." The pig contemplated the chicken's suggestion, and he said, "Well, for you, that involves a small sacrifice, but for me, it would involve total commitment." What Jesus is saying in these verses, he's saying, be the pig. Jesus is saying, be the pig. He's looking for total commitment. We no longer live for ourselves, but for him. And I think some of the problem with this is we don't understand this idea of the cross sometimes. I mean, we wear crosses, we put them up in buildings. So the idea of the cross, sometimes we don't understand what he's talking about. You see, back then, no one would wear a cross. No one would put one up in a building because it was a terrible way to die. It would be like you wearing a necklace that had an electric chair on it. I mean, that's what it would be like back then for these people. And so when we think about picking up our cross, we may not understand what Jesus is saying is you are dying. That's what you're going to do. Die to yourself. And it means that we are on mission with God. It is a one-way trip. And that is why we serve God. We've given up our life to him. We live only to serve. I mean, that's exactly what Jesus said next. He said, to save your life, you will lose it. If you don't hear anything else I say today, I want you to hear this. Jesus said, to save your life, you will lose it. And here's the thing. Salvation can't be earned, but it isn't free. Salvation can't be earned, but it isn't free. Jesus expects that we submit everything to him. This paradoxical quote from Jesus is one of the most famous sayings from the Gospels. And Mark Moore in his commentary says this. Truly, it is the lifeblood of our commitment to Christ, the promise of not only a better future, but the reality of a better life today. You see, it is only after a seed is buried in the ground that it springs to life. It is only after a caterpillar entombs itself in a cocoon that it can fly. And it is only after a Christian carries a cross that he finds the fullness of life. You see, that's what it takes. We give up what we know to get what Jesus promises. And this is the heart of why we serve. This is why we give up our time, our talents, and our resources in honor of God and to move his mission forward. When we are serving, it is perfectly okay to imagine you are picking up your cross and following. There are things that I would prefer not to do whenever I serve. And maybe you're there as well. And you might have to remind yourself, all right, I'm picking up my cross and I'm following because I'm going to serve. And it's okay. It isn't about whether you want to do it or not. It is about doing it. I mean, Jesus did the exact same thing at the end of his life. Don't you remember? He said to God, he's like, I literally don't want to pick up this cross. And if you can take it from me, that would be great. God says, no, that's what I need you to do. And Jesus says, all right, whatever you need me to do, including carrying the literal cross, I will do it. You see, that means God's in charge, not our desires, our wants, or our whims. We have a guy here at church, great servant, does all kinds of different areas he serves. And he says whenever he doesn't want to do something, he goes, all right, I'm storing up treasures in heaven. And that's okay. That's okay. It's not about us always wanting to do it. It's about the idea that ultimately we are carrying a cross and that God is in charge, so I'm going to do it. And I am going to serve. And it's a great way to look at it when serving gets tough. You see, that's what it means to lose our life. So we're giving up our desires for God. And when we do that, we answer the next question that Jesus posed. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very soul? Think about that for a second. It seems like we've gained everything, but in the end, we lose. I mean, Paul uses the word disqualified when thinking about this idea of losing our very soul. We can gain the whole world, but we can be disqualified by not letting God be first. You see, that means we serve. We pick up our cross and we follow even when it's tough, even if it is not what we want to do. Service means we do things sometimes that we do not want to do. That's what it means to serve. But we have chosen to walk that path with Jesus when we accept his salvation. So what does that practically look like? What does that look like for us? Well, serving has to be intentional or it won't happen. Colossians 3 says this. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. And I'm not able to pick up my cross or to lose my life without it being a daily priority. I get way too distracted by things that don't matter. Maybe you're like me in that if you don't plan something specific, other things will come up. And so I have to say, God, I'm going to serve you today. And I have to remember that I am blessed to get to work for the God. You are blessed to get to serve the Lord. And when you serve, you see, it isn't for anyone else. I mean, and they may benefit by you serving, but it is for God's glory. And that's why we can do things we would prefer not to. That is why we look for opportunities to serve. You see, we have to be looking for opportunities to do God's work. A seminary professor had a class of 15 students. And these 15 students were preparing for Christian ministry. And at the beginning of one of his classes, he distributed envelopes to the students with sealed instructions. 5 students received instructions to proceed across the campus without delay, and the directions read, "You have 15 minutes to reach your destination. You have no time to spare. Don't loiter or do anything else, or your grade will be docked." The next 5 students also received instructions to make their way across the campus, but they were given 45 minutes to do so. "You have plenty of time," the directions read, "but don't be too slow." And so the last 5 students received instructions to get to the other side of campus anytime before 5 o'clock, giving them about 5 hours to complete the assignments. Now, here's what the students didn't know: that the professor had arranged for several drama majors from a nearby university to position themselves along the path that led across campus. The drama students were instructed to act as though they were suffering and in great need. One pretended to be homeless in need of food and clothing. Another sat with his head in his hands, crying as if he had just experienced a terrible tragedy. Still another acted as if he were in desperate need of medical care. Now, you can imagine what happened as the Christian ministry students tried to complete their assignments. None of the students in the first group stopped to offer any help to the needy people. Only 2 in the second group did, but all 5 students in the third group took time to stop and help. You see, our priorities will determine how we will serve. Are we more concerned with what we are doing, or is our top priority taking up our cross and following? And when we're looking to lose our life for God, we will find ways to serve. We just can't be in such a hurry with our stuff and miss the whole reason that God has us here to begin with. So what does this look like to lose our life? Practically, how do I know when that has happened real quick? One thing is this: we will never have done enough. We will never finish serving. Even, as you retire, you're like, I'm retired. That doesn't mean you stop serving God in some way. We never retire from serving God with our lives. We continually serve. But we should also be able to specifically describe what our service is. What is it you do for God? Now, I realize, and you may be thinking this, that's easy for you to say, Pastor, because this is your job. Like, this is what you do. And so no matter how many hours I spent volunteering here at the church or doing whatever, it's still considered my job. I totally get that. That is why I spend time outside of our walls serving in the community. I volunteer and coach and do these other things because I want to set an example and I want to be out reaching people as well. And so what is it you do to serve? This fall, we're going to have a series, and I'm really excited about this series, and we're going to talk about our shape. S-H-A-P-E, and our shape talks about how God has created us. It's our spiritual gifts, our heart, our abilities, our personality, and our experience, and how do all those come together to be able to serve God most effectively? But here's the thing. You don't have to wait to jump into service. I mean, you can start today. Anyone can hold a baby. Anyone can greet. You can be a children's guide, a small group discussion leader. There's all kinds of ministries on the security team. There's all kinds of different ministries here at the church that you can jump into. Jump in, you see, and God will lead you. When I was a student growing up at my church, I was in high school, and I would help at different things, VBS, whatever it was, camps. For some reason, they gave me the 6 or 8 rowdiest boys that would ever show up to the events. Every single time. I mean, they were nuts. And these were my group every time. The leaders would just look at me. I go, hey, who's my group? And they would just look at me and smile. They go, you know who your group is. And I'm like, yes, I do know who my group is. And I realized through serving that God had called me to go into ministry, specifically youth ministry then. Because I saw these kids and I realized these kids need Jesus. This is what God is calling me to do. You see, I jumped in and served, and God provided the direction. Here's a fact you may not know. You can't steer a car that's not moving. So you want to know what God has for you? Just jump in. Jump in and serve. And it may not be your cup of tea at first, but God will lead you through that. One of my favorite stories is this. I was at Chandler, and I had a lady call on a Sunday morning. It was supposed to serve an hour later. And she calls and she says, I'm in Colorado. And my answer was, you woke up there? Like you went to bed in Arizona and you woke up in Colorado? You know, I'm like, you knew you were going to be there before. Why call me an hour before service starts? So I went to the 3-year-old teacher that I had. I had an assistant, a guy, just a good friend of mine, played basketball, just a dude. And I looked at him, I said, hey, I know you've been helping for about 6 months. I go, but I need you to teach today. His eyes got real big. No, he goes like, oh, dude, I don't know about that, man. I go, I know you can do this. You can teach. You've been doing this. I know you can do it. He's like, all right, I'll try. I'll try and make this happen. The funny thing is, I'd been at Chandler about 2 years. When I left 10 years later, guess who was teaching our 3-year-old class? Every week for 10 years. You know why? Because he jumped in. He's like, I don't know. Let's do this. I'll help here. And God led and guided and God provided. We have to jump in and let God direct. But I know service isn't just in the church. But we should have a place of service within the church. That's because we are committed to seeing God's mission moving forward. But service is looking for ways to help others. So what does that look like in the church? What does that look like in our community for you? See, for us to say that we are growing to be like Jesus, we have to serve. And honestly, picking up our cross and following, it's not a fun thing. It means we're dying for God. It is difficult, it is hard, and it is how we are like Jesus. So what will you do? The real question is, will you be willing to serve in some capacity? If you are not already serving in the church somewhere, we have some options for you. If you have our app, you can get it by scanning the back of the bulletin, and you hit the button serve, and there's a whole list of ministries that you can sign up for. You can jump right there. It's time to move. It's time to serve. But the first step before we serve is to commit. We have to commit our lives to God, and our service flows out of our commitments, and our commitment to Jesus is foundational to that. So we have to give our life to Him and then take up our cross and follow. We call that getting on base with God. The B is to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. A is to admit that I'm a sinner and I need a Savior. S is to surrender and say, God, you are in charge of every area of my life. I will pick up my cross and I will serve whatever that is. And E is to express that in Christian baptism. And then we can follow in the footsteps of our Savior as we serve. But if you've already made that decision, if you've already done that, then here's our mission this week. Make sure you are serving. And I know many here are. I know many of you already serve faithfully. But if you are, then as a body, we aren't at full strength without you. Make sure you're plugged in and part of fulfilling God's mission for the church at large and part of helping us with our mission here at Southern Heights. You see, God has a place for you to serve. The question is this: will you pick up your cross and follow? Or will you choose to keep your life and lose it?